Chapter 22 of the surprising adventures of Bampfylde Moore Carew, King of the Beggars, by Bampfylde Moore Carew. This recording is in the public domain. Mr. Carew, happening to be in the city of Wells in Somersetshire on a Sunday, was told that the bishop was to preach that morning, upon which he slips on a black waistcoat and morning gown, and went out to meet the bishop as he was walking in procession, and addressed himself to his lordship as a poor unhappy man, whose misfortunes had turned his brain, which the bishop hearing gave him 5 shillings. From Wells he steered to Bridgewater, but did not appear in the daytime, and went only in the evenings upon his crutches as a poor lame man, not being known by any one till he discovered himself. Having heard that young Lord Clifford, his first cousin, who had just returned from his travels abroad, was at his seat in Callington, about 4 miles from Bridgewater, he resolved to pay him a visit. In his way thither resided Parson C., who, being one whom nature had made up in a hurry without a heart, Mr. Carew had never been able to obtain anything of him, even under the most moving appearance of distress, but a cup of small drink. Stopping now in his way, he found the parson was gone to Lord Clifford's, but being saluted at the door by a fine black spaniel, with almost as much crustiness as he would have been had his master been at home, he thought himself under no stronger obligation of observing the strict laws of honour than the parson did of hospitality, and therefore soon charmed the crossness of the spaniel, and made him follow him to Bridgewater. For it is very remarkable that the art has been found of taming the most savage and ill-natured brutes, which is generally attended with success, but it requires a much higher skill, and is but seldom successful, to soften the ill nature and inhumanity of man. Whether it is that the brutes are more capable of receiving instruction, or whether the ill nature of man exceeds that of the brutes, we cannot well determine. Having secured the spaniel and passed the night merrily in Bridgewater, he set out the next morning for Lord Clifford's, and in his way called upon the parson again, who very crustily told him he had lost his dog, and supposed some of his gang had stolen him, to which Mr. Carew very calmly replied, what was he to his dog, or what was his dog to him? If he would make him drink, it was well, for he was very dry. At last, with the use of much rhetoric, he got a cup of small drink. Then taking leave of him, he went to the Red Lion in the same parish, where he stayed some time. In the meantime, down ran the parson to my Lord Clifford's, to acquaint him that Mr. Carew was in the parish, and to advise him to take care of his dogs. So that Mr. Carew, coming down immediately after, found a servant with one dog in his arms, and another with another. Here one stood whistling, and another calling, and both my lord and his brother were running about to seek after their favourites. Mr. Carew asked my lord what was the meaning of this hurry, and if his dogs were cripples, because he saw several carried in the servant's arms, adding, he hoped his lordship did not imagine he was come to steal any of them. Upon which his lordship told him that Parson C. had advised him to be careful, as he had lost his spaniel but the day before. It may be so, replied he. The parson knows but little of me or the laws of our community, if he is ignorant that with us ingratitude is unknown, and the property of our friends always sacred. His lordship, hearing this, entertained him very handsomely, and both himself and his brother made him a present. There being about this time a great fair at Bridgewater, in the county of Somerset, our hero appeared there upon crutches, as a poor miserable cripple, in company with many of his subjects that were full as unfortunate as himself, some blind, some deaf, some dumb, etc., among whom were his old friends and schoolfellows, Martin, Escott, and Coleman. The mayor of that corporation, a bitter enemy to their community, jocosely said that he would make the blind see, the deaf hear, and the lame walk; and by way of preparation or beginning to this intended cure, he had them all apprehended and confined in a dark hole, which greatly terrified them with the apprehension of severe punishment. After one night's repose in limbo, he sent a physician or surgeon of most profound skill and judgment to them, who brought the keys of their melancholy apartments, and, pretending greatly to befriend them, advised them, if there were any of them counterfeits, to make haste out of the town, or otherwise they must expect no mercy from the mayor, unknown to whom he had privately stolen the keys. Then, unlocking the door, forth issued the disabled and infirm prisoners. The lame threw aside their crutches and artificial legs, and made an exceeding good use of their natural ones. The blind made shift to see the way out of town, and the deaf themselves with great attention hearkened to this their friend, and followed his advice with all possible speed. The mayor, with the aldermen and several gentlemen, planted themselves opposite to the prison, and were spectators to this diverting scene, calling out to stop them, not with an intention to do them any prejudice, but only of adding a spur to their speed. However, there were some who were ready enough to lay hold on them, and our hero, in a struggle of this nature, left a skirt of his garment behind him, which might be done without much violence, as we may reasonably conclude it to have been none of the soundest, and Coleman was so closely pursued that he plunged into the river and swam to the opposite shore. In short, so well did these cripples ply their limbs, that none of them could be taken, excepting a real object, a lame man, who, in spite of the fear and consternation he was in, could not mend his decrepit pace. He therefore was brought before the mayor, who, after slightly rebuking him for his vagrant course of life, ordered him to be relieved in a very plentiful and generous manner, and the whole corporation was exceeding kind to him. One method of gaining his ends our hero had peculiar to himself. He used with great intent to read the inscriptions on tombs and monuments in churchyards, and when the deceased person had a character for piety and charity, he would with the greatest importunity apply to his or her surviving relations, and if they refused an alms, he would, in the most moving terms imaginable, implore their charity for the sake of their deceased relation, praying they would follow the laudable and virtuous example of their dead husband, wife, father, mother, or the like, hoping there was the same God, the same spirit of piety, religion, and charity, still dwelling in the house as before the death of the person deceased. These and the like expressions, uttered in a most suppliant and pathetic voice, used to extort not only very handsome contributions, but tears from the person to whom he applied. Some time after this he engaged at Burton, in Somersetshire, in the habit and character of a seaman, cast away in coming from Newfoundland, with a captain who by his great severity had rendered himself the terror of all the mendicant order. But he, relying upon his perfect acquaintance with the country, ventured up to him, had the best entertainment his house afforded, and was honourably dismissed with a considerable piece of money. Captains H H and N with both of whom our hero had sailed, were intimate acquaintances of this captain, of whom he asked many questions, and also about Newfoundland, which country trade he had used the most part of the time. To all which questions he gave very satisfactory answers. This captain had detected so many impostors, that he concluded they were all so, but not being able to find Mr. Carew in any one error, he was very proud of it, pitied and relieved him in an extraordinary manner, went with him himself to the principal people of the town, wrote him letters of recommendation to his distant relations and friends that lay in his road, and acted with such extraordinary kindness, as if he thought he could never do enough. It is to be remarked, that he passed rather for a passenger than a seaman. In the same town lived Lord B—y, who had a son who was captain of the Antelope man of war, stationed in the West Indies, and who died on the passage. Mr. Carew informed himself of every circumstance relating thereto, and made it his business to meet his lordship as he came out of church. After his first application, he gave his lordship to understand that he was a spectator of the burial of his son on board the Antelope. At the same time came up this critical captain, who gave him the character of a man of great veracity, so that his lordship gave him a guinea, his eldest son 5 shillings, and also good entertainment from the house. This happened to be a fair day. He thereupon, going into the town, was accosted by an apothecary, who whispered him in the ear, saying that he knew him to be the famous Bampfylde Moore Carew, and had most grossly imposed upon the captain and the town, but at the same time assured him that he would not injure him, but faithfully keep the secret. In the meantime there was an Irish quack doctor in view, who had gathered the whole market around him, and who, with more strength of lungs than sense of argument, most loudly harangued, entertaining them in a very florid manner with the sovereign virtues of his pills, plasters, and self; and so far did he impose upon them, as to vend his packets pretty plentifully, which the apothecary could not forbear beholding with an envious eye, and jocularly asked Mr. Carew if he could not help him to some revenge upon this dangerous rival and antagonist of his, which he promised him to do effectually. Accordingly he got a little phial, and filled it up with spirits of turpentine. He then mixed in with the gaping auditory of this Irish itinerant physician, who was in the midst of them, mounted on his steed, adorned with a pompous curb bridle, with a large parcel of all curing medicines in his bags behind him, and was, with a great deal of confidence and success, Esculapius like, distributing health around him. We must observe that our physician had taken his stand among the stalls of orange and gingerbread merchants, shoemakers, glovers, and other such retailers. Mr. Carew therefore approached him, and planted himself close by the horse, and wetting his fingers with the spirits, rested his hand upon the steed, as an unconcerned person might have done. At the same time, putting aside the hair, he rubbed the turpentine upon the bare flesh, which immediately beginning to burn and smart, the afflicted quadruped began to express his sense of pain by flinging his hinder legs, gently shaking himself, and other restless motions, which made the poor mountebank wonder what had befallen his horse. But the pain increasing, the disorderly behaviour of the steed increased proportionably, who now began to kick, prance, stand on end, neigh, immoderately shake himself, utterly disregarding both his bridle and rider, and running a tilt against the stalls of oranges, gingerbread, gloves, breeches, shoes, etc., which he overthrew and trampled under foot. This occasioned a scramble among the boys for the eatables, and there were some who were but too unmerciful to the scattered goods of the poor shoemakers and glovers, who, enraged by their several losses, began to curse the doctor and his Rosinante, who was all this while capering, roaring, and dancing among their oranges, panniers of eggs, etc., to the entire ruin of the hucksters, who now began to deal very heavy blows both on the unfortunate horse and his distressed master. This odd spectacle and adventure attracted the eyes and attention of the whole fair, which was all in an uproar, some laughing, some crying, particularly the poor suffering pedlars, some fighting, and others most unmercifully cursing and swearing. To make short the story, the doctor rode about the fair, without either hat or wig, at the pleasure and discretion of his horse, among the ruined and overturned stalls, and the dissipated mob, who concluded both the quack and the steed to be either mad or bewitched, and enjoyed their frolicsome situation. The doctor, being no longer able to keep his seat, fell headlong into the miry street. The horse ran into a river, and rolled himself over several times, to the entire confusion and ruin of the inestimable pills and plasters. The doctor employed a good farrier, and after some time the horse came to himself again. The reader may very easily judge what glorious diversion this was for the apothecary and Mr. Carew, who were spectators of the whole scene. He was treated handsomely upon this account, not only by the apothecary, but all others of the same profession in the town, and several other gentlemen. Upon Mr. Carew's departure from Burton, the generous captain befriended him with many recommendatory letters to friends and acquaintance that lay in his road, as he pretended, nay, indeed, he was never out of it. Thence he proceeded to Bristol and other places where the letters were directed to, and received considerable sums of money from many on account of these letters, which were mostly to captains of vessels and gentlemen that had been at sea, with whom he several times passed muster very well, it being by desire of the captain, as was mentioned in the letters, that they examined him. Sometimes he and his wife, in conjunction with Coleman and his wife, being all dressed genteelly, passed for gipsies of extraordinary knowledge and reputation. Many a poor, credulous, unsuspecting person became their prey, and many a good booty they got in almost every town of the counties of Cornwall and Devon. Once in particular, himself and Coleman, with both their spouses, being in Buckfordsley, near Exeter, one Mr. Collard, a wealthy but simple shoemaker, came to their quarters to consult them on a very intricate and important affair. He told them that it was the opinion of everybody in the country that his grandmother had somewhere concealed very large sums of money before her death, and that himself, by several dreams, was confirmed in the same opinion, and that he thought proper to advise with them upon the affair, not doubting but they, by the help of their profound learning and knowledge, for which they were so famous through the West, were capable of informing him in what particular place he might find this particular treasure, which if they would discover to him, he would give them 30 guineas. Our magicians, after long deliberation and consultation with their books, told him, that if he would that night take a walk with one of them, he would see the spirit of his grandmother, that he must not be afraid of the apparition, but follow it till it vanished away, and in that individual spot of ground from which the ghost vanished, there he would find the hidden treasure. In order for the execution of this scheme, Coleman put a woman's cap on his head, washed his face, and sprinkled meal on it while wet, stuck the broken pieces of a tobacco pipe between his teeth, and wrapping his body in a white sheet, planted himself in the road that Collard and Mr. Carew were to come. The moon at this time shone very bright, which gave an additional horror to the pretended spectre. Our hero, by virtue of his supposed profound learning and most mysterious science, spoke to it in an unknown language, to the following effect: Hi, wort, bush, rumley to the toggy cull, and ogle him in the muns. At which command the terrific hobgoblin fiercely advanced up to poor Collard, and with a most ghastly look stared him in the face. The shoemaker was greatly terrified thereat, and shook and trembled as if a fit of the ague had been upon him, and creeping close to Mr. Carew, laid fast hold of his clothes, imagining he had sufficient power to protect him from the threatening appearance of this insolent apparition, whereupon he bid the ghost hike to the vial, and would have persuaded the frightened Collard to have followed his departing grandmother in order to observe the particular place from which she vanished, but no persuasions of his could induce him to move from his side. They then returned to the alehouse they had left, and Mr. Carew, this method of conjuration miscarrying through the shoemaker's fear, cast a figure, and informed Crispin that if he took up 2 or 3 planks of the floor of this little parlour, he would there find the concealed treasure at the depth of about 3 or 4 feet. Upon his hearing this joyful news, the shoemaker instantly disbursed the 30 guineas, highly extolling them as people of the profoundest skill that he had ever heard of or conversed with. But whether he was of the same opinion when he came to dig for the treasure, we will not take upon us to say, but we may suppose the contrary. Happening a short time after this to be in Breakness, near Lymington, in the character of a castaway seaman, he went to the house of Mr. Joseph Hayes, an eminent and wealthy Presbyterian parson, of whom he begged relief in the most earnest manner he was able, for God's sake, with uplifted eyes and hands, and upon his bended knee, but could not, with all his importunity and eloquence, obtain a crust of bread or a draught of small beer. Mr. Carew, not accustomed to be unsuccessful in his applications, could by no means brook this churlishness of the parson, and thought it highly necessary for the benefit of his community that it should not go unpunished. He was a great sportsman, and had 2 fine greyhounds, the one named Hector, the other Fly, and 2 excellent spaniels, Cupid and Dido, and an admirable setting dog called Sancho. Our hero, therefore, about 12 o'clock on the same night, paid a second visit to the parson's house, and brought away all these fine dogs with him, and afterwards he sent a letter to the parson to this purpose: Reverend Sir, you err if you suspect yourself to have been wronged of your dogs by any of your neighbours, the castaway seamen who begged so earnestly for the love of God, to whom you would not vouchsafe a crust of bread or a draught of small beer, took them away to teach you another time to behave to unfortunate strangers more as becomes your profession and your plentiful circumstances. The mayor of Weymouth in Dorsetshire fared little better at his hands. This gentleman was an implacable enemy to all Mr. Carew's subjects. He therefore, happening to be in that town, and overhearing the mayor talking to a gentleman in the street, and saying that he was going to dine with Captain Colloway of Upton, he thought this a proper opportunity for taking some revenge of the mayor, for the many indignities he had put on his subjects. Having soon got intelligence what suits of clothes the mayor had, and understanding he had a good snuff-coloured suit, he went to his house, and informed the lady mayoress that he was a seaman under misfortunes, had met with the mayor as he was going to dinner at Captain Colloway's of Upton, and his honour had sent him to her, giving him orders to receive his snuff-coloured suit of clothes from her, which the good-natured gentlewoman hearing, without the least scruple, quickly brought him the coat, waistcoat, and breeches. Thus our hero, by turning his natural ingenuity to account, procured a handsome suit of clothes, while at the same time he was revenging himself upon his enemy, fulfilling the old proverb of killing 2 dogs with 1 stone. It is unnecessary to say that our hero departed from Weymouth forthwith, Mr. Carew being in Bristol at a time when there was a hot press, wherein they not only impressed seamen, but able-bodied landmen they could anywhere meet with, which made some fly one way and some another, putting the city into a great rout and consternation. He, among the rest, knowing himself to have a body of rather a dangerous bigness, he was willing to secure himself as effectually as he possibly could, greatly preferring his own ease to the interest and honour of his king. He therefore set his wife and landlady to work, who with all speed and proper attention to cleanliness made a great number of small mutton pies, plum puddings, cheesecakes, and custards, which our hero, in the ordinary attire of a female vendor of these commodities, hawked about the city, crying, plum pudding, plum pudding, plum pudding, hot plum pudding, piping hot, smoking hot, hot plum pudding. Plum pudding echoed in every street and corner, even in the midst of the eager press gang, some of whom spent their penny with this masculine pie woman, and seldom failed to serenade her with many a complimentary title, such as bitch and whore. Arriving at Squire Rhodes's seat, near Kingsbridge in Devonshire, and knowing the squire had married a Dorsetshire lady, he thought proper also to become a Dorsetshire man, and of Lyme, which was the place of the lady's nativity, and applied himself to the squire and his lady, whom he met both together, giving them to understand that he was lost in a vessel belonging to Lyme. The squire and his lady gave him 5 shillings each, for country's sake, and entertained him very well at their own house. This was early in the forenoon, and he wished to put off his time a little before proceeding upon another adventure. Going from hence, he went to a public house called Mouston Cross, about 1/4 of a mile from the squire's. He there fell into company with Squire Reynolds, Squire Ford, Dr. Rhodes, brother to the squire, and several other gentlemen, who were met there to make happy after a hunting match, in which they had been uncommonly successful, and were much inclined to be jovial. In the afternoon there was a terrific storm of rain, thunder, and lightning, that continued with great violence for several hours. In the midst of this tempestuous weather, he, having a great mind to clear his afternoon's expenses, stripped off all his apparel, except his nightcap, shoes, and breeches, and went to Squire Rhodes. Nothing could possibly look with a more deplorable appearance than this naked and wretched spectacle. In such dreadful weather, the landlord, with pity regarding his destitute appearance, fetched him a shirt, as he thought, to cover his nakedness; but upon his endeavouring to put it on, it proved to be a smock belonging to the good woman of the house, which afforded a great deal of diversion to the good squire and his benevolent lady, who happened to be looking from their window enjoying the mistake. When calling to him and inquiring from whence he came, he pretended to have been cast away at Bigbury Bay, during the late violent tempest, in a vessel belonging to Poole, and he was the only person on board that had escaped. Squire Rhodes ordered a fine Holland shirt and a suit of good clothes to be given to him, as also a hearty refreshing dram, and then, kindly giving him 5 shillings, dismissed him with every mark of commiseration for his unfortunate condition, not in the least suspecting him to be the poor lime man, whom both his lady and himself had been so generous in relieving his wants in the morning. Having succeeded so much to his satisfaction in levying 2 contributions in one day on the benevolent Squire Rhodes and his lady, he quickly determined on making another trial upon their good nature, for which purpose he retired to the nearest house which was frequented by the members of his community, where he dressed himself as a farmer, and speedily returned to the squire's, to whose presence he was admitted. He stated that he had been a tenant on the estate of Squire H., a gentleman between whom and Squire Rhodes he knew there was a disagreement of long standing for many years, where he had reared a numerous and happy family in respectability; that about 3 years ago the squire had seduced his eldest daughter, a handsome girl of 18 years, who died in giving birth to a stillborn son; that his wife had died shortly after of a broken heart, and he was left to struggle through the world with a helpless family of young children; that through bad crops and bad debts he had fallen in arrears of his rent, and his cruel landlord had seized upon his whole stock, and turned him out of his favourite home, to become a destitute wanderer, destitute of food, shelter, or clothing for himself and family. The benevolent Squire Rhodes, whose ear was ever open to the tale of pity, whose heart was ever ready to relieve the unfortunate, after venting many imprecations on the hard-hearted squire, bestowed a guinea on the poor farmer. Having obtained this 3rd contribution from the unsuspecting squire, he returned to the public house, where the gentlemen waited for him, for they were the principal occasion of this last adventure, and being informed how he had fared, diverted themselves exceedingly with the stratagem, and shortly after meeting with Squire Rhodes, they discovered the various impositions that had been practised upon him, and very heartily bantered him thereupon. Some time after this, Mr. Carew, exercising his profession at Modbury, where Squire Rhodes's father lived, among other houses, made his application at Legassick's, where he by chance was visiting. Mr. Carew knocked at the kitchen door, which being opened, he saw his old friend the squire, who was then alone, and in a careless manner swinging his cane about. As soon as he began to tell his lamentable tale, Mr. Rhodes said, "I was 3 times in one day imposed on by that rogue Bampfylde Moore Carew, to whose gang you may very likely belong. Furthermore, I do not live here, but am a stranger." Meantime in comes Mr. Legassick, with a bottle of wine in his hand, giving Mr. Carew a private wink, to let him understand that he knew him, and then very gravely inquired into the circumstances of his misfortune, as also of the affairs and inhabitants of Dartmouth, from whence he pretended to have sailed several times, of all which he gave a full and particular account, upon which Mr. Legassick gave him 5 shillings. and recommended him as a real object to Mr. Rhodes, who also made the same present, upon which Mr. Legassick burst out laughing, and being asked the reason thereof, he could not forbear telling him, even in Mr. Carew's presence, when Mr. Rhodes, finding himself a fourth time imposed upon by the same person, with a great deal of good nature, made himself very merry therewith. Mr. Carew being now advanced in years, and his strength beginning to fail, he was seized with a violent fever, which confined him to his bed for several weeks. On recovering, he reflected how idly he had spent his life, and came to the resolution of resigning the Egyptian sceptre. The assembly, finding him determined, reluctantly complied, and he departed amidst the applause, as well as the regrets of his subjects, who despaired of ever again having such a king. Our hero returned home to the place of his nativity, but finding the air of the town not rightly to agree with him, and the death of some of his relations rendering his circumstances quite easy, he retired to the west country, where he purchased a neat cottage, which he embellished in a handsome style, and lived in a manner becoming a good old English gentleman, respected by his neighbours, and beloved by the poor, to whom his doors were ever open. Here he died, full of years and honours, regretted by all. Having left his daughter a handsome fortune, she was married to a neighbouring gentleman of good family, by whom she had a numerous family of promising children. We shall now conclude our true history by observing, that we consider Mr. Carew to have as good a claim to fame and immortality as any of the heroes of the present age. We acknowledge he had his faults, but everybody knows a perfect character is quite out of fashion, and that the authors of the present age hold it as an absurdity to draw even a fictitious hero without an abundance of faults. End of chapter 22.